In 1992, Nintendo released a quirky little racing game for the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo. They called it Super Mario Kart. The game began as a failed experiment, developed as a small side project within Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Group. But the young group of designers saw potential in the game and persevered. Over time, it evolved into an offbeat kart racer, featuring twisty racetracks, power-ups, and familiar characters from the Super Mario universe. Despite receiving little hype leading up to its release, Super Mario Kart was a surprise success. It became the best-selling Super Famicom game in Japan, and one of the best-selling games for the system worldwide. But more importantly, Super Mario Kart brought people together and set a new standard for multiplayer console games. It launched a franchise that still exists today and continues to be one of Nintendo's best-selling game series. This is the story of Super Mario Kart. In the fall of 1990, Nintendo entered the next generation with their newest console, the Super Famicom. But they were late to the party. NEC's PC Engine had been on the market since 1987. Sega had joined the competition with the Mega Drive in 1988. However, Nintendo was confident their latest console would dominate the market. Hardware-wise, it was much more powerful than its predecessor, the Famicom. But the true strength of the Super Famicom lay in the software. Nintendo knew that all the hardware power in the world meant nothing if the games weren't good. The Super Famicom launched with 2 games, and they struck a balance between showing off new technology and providing exciting gameplay. The first launch title was Super Mario World, a continuation of Nintendo's most popular franchise. Super Mario World was an evolution of the beloved series, with minor technical features to show off the new bells and whistles of the Super Famicom. Things like rotating platforms and transparency effects were cool, but didn't affect the gameplay that much. The second launch title, however, was an impressive technological feat: F-Zero. F-Zero was a fast-paced, futuristic racing game where players zipped through huge, sprawling maps with long, narrow tracks. It was unlike anything ever seen on a console, and it was all thanks to a new graphics technology in the Super Famicom called Mode 7. Mode 7 was able to scale and rotate a background, altering the perspective for a pseudo-3D effect. It was impressive. Critics were blown away by F-Zero. Famitsu magazine gave the game 37 points out of 40, 3 points higher than Super Mario World. One reviewer stated, "The sense of speed found here is unlike any other racing game we've seen so far. It feels like this game clearly shows off the allure of the Super Famicom." But there was one major problem with F-Zero. It was a single-player game. That bothered Nintendo's chief software producer, Shigeru Miyamoto. Miyamoto was the man behind some of Nintendo's most popular game series, including Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. He was also heavily involved with developing the Super Famicom. He consulted on the system's design, the controllers, and even the packaging. Miyamoto insisted that the Super Famicom come with 2 controllers. He wanted to ensure developers would keep multiplayer in mind when they made games. But ironically, neither launch title utilized both controllers. F-Zero was single-player only, and while Super Mario World was a 2-player game, players couldn't play simultaneously. Miyamoto felt that development teams had only scratched the surface of the potential of the Super Famicom. So he devised a new project. Make a game like F-Zero, but for 2 players. He assigned the task to 2 talented staff members within Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Group, Tadashi Sugiyama and Hideki Kono. Both men had experience working with Miyamoto. Sugiyama joined Nintendo in 1983 and came up through the creative department with him. Sugiyama initially designed characters such as Popo and Nana from Ice Climber. and eventually became a game director. His first job was the highly anticipated second game in the Zelda series, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Sugiyama also had experience with the Mode 7 technology in the Super Famicom, having just wrapped up director duties on Pilot Wings, a flight simulation game. Working alongside Sugiyama was Hideki Kono. Kono joined Nintendo in 1986 and cut his teeth designing Ice Hockey, a fun arcade-like sports game for the Famicom Disk System. But his most significant work was creating the overworld maps and levels for both Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World. Miyamoto oversaw both projects. Kono recalled he learned a lot about game development and creation by working under Miyamoto. Now, in the fall of 1990, Miyamoto entrusted Sugiyama and Kono to direct a new racing game for 2 players. As for himself, Miyamoto would serve as a producer, a self-proclaimed, pretty relaxed role. He remembered, "I don't know if I can really say I participated in this development. It was more like I observed it." Sugiyama and Kono also recruited additional staff, including programmers, to help with the project. Among them was Masato Kimura. Kimura had helped program F-Zero, so it made sense for him to help with a potential sequel. He was named the director of programming. They also brought in Hajime Yajima. Yajima had previously worked on Pilot Wings, implementing a digital signal processing chip, or DSP chip, on the cartridge. The chip helped the game program run extra calculations behind the scenes. Sugiyama and Kono knew their 2-player racing game would need this chip to work. So Miyamoto walked over to Yajima's desk, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Let's work together." With a team in place, Sugiyama, Kono, and the rest of the staff got to work. But by most accounts, the work was somewhat informal. There was no master design document, and Kono recalled not taking any notes during meetings. They were more like chat sessions. Everyone sat near each other in the office, so team members simply went up to each other's desks and talked. Many team members split their time with other, more extensive projects. Despite this, they were a dedicated group. Kono recalled that early development was mostly just sitting at one's own desk, grinding it out. Unfortunately, they quickly learned that making a 2-player F-Zero game was next to impossible. F-Zero's racetracks were massive, with long straightaways that gave a sense of speed. The tracks were displayed over an area of 100 screens, but due to hardware limitations, it was way too complex to do this for 2 players simultaneously, so sacrifices had to be made. With 2 players, the racetrack would have to be downsized from 100 screens to only 16. With such a small race course, they couldn't add those long straightaways, only twists and turns. Kono finally admitted, with more than 1 player, it would have been impossible to illustrate the high speeds of F-Zero. F-Zero's fast, futuristic vehicles would not work on such a small map. But maybe another type of vehicle could. So, as a last-ditch effort to save the project, the team changed things up.
That was our first idea, actually. A fun, light-hearted game where you zip around unrealistically in cars. It wouldn't be the life-or-death, dangerous world of F1 racing, but more the atmosphere of screeching wheels as you zip around in an amusement park. From those ideas, the concept eventually evolved naturally from cars to karts. Shigeru Miyamoto.
Go-karts were a perfect choice. They didn't go very fast, which suited the smaller, winding courses. And they were becoming more widespread in Japan thanks to the rising popularity of F1 racing. Japanese auto manufacturer Honda was heavily involved in the sport, providing engines for winning racers such as Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. And many F1 racers started their careers by training in go-karts. There were many F1 racing video games. Nintendo had even made a few themselves. But there were very few kart racing games. The idea had enormous potential. Co-director Hideki Kono recalled it was lucky timing for us. But there was one big problem. No one on the staff had ever ridden a go-kart. Co-director Tadashi Sugiyama purchased a book on go-kart racing and watched videos, hoping to get more acquainted. But a senior illustrator on staff and a veteran of the anime industry, Yoichi Kotabe, shared a piece of wisdom with the team. No amount of research beats the real thing. Kotabe suggested the team go to an amusement park and ride around in real go-karts. Kono took the idea to Miyamoto, who needed to approve the outing. Miyamoto rebuked the suggestion, thinking it was unnecessary. But he eventually relented. The team took a trip to the Nemu no Sato amusement park and drove around on go-karts for a day. Illustrators took sketches of the karts. Programmers got a feel for physics and handling. The development team also got to experience the lower speed and perspective of the vehicle. It was an educational experience. But more importantly, Kono, Sugiyama, and the rest of the staff learned that kart racing was really fun. But that was only the start of their crash course on go-karts. Back at the office, the team built a small remote control kart to learn about its internal construction and to let staff members get more familiar with the vehicle. Unfortunately, a programmer immediately crashed it into the wall, ending their research. Despite a few bumps in the road, a new game took shape from the ashes of the old one. By June of 1991, the development team had a prototype featuring 2 driving modes. The first mode used a slower F-Zero style hover vehicle. The second mode used karts. At this point, there was no racing at all, just aimless driving around a generic track. But between the 2 vehicles, the team loved the karts the most. Specifically, the experience of zooming past other racers. But visually, the game needed some work. The racers were generic people with helmets and coveralls in various colors. Kono noted that, with 8 nearly identical guys racing, it'd be boring. So then we began to focus on design. They needed a better way to tell the racers apart. So the development team brainstormed possible characters that were easily recognizable from behind. And one character immediately came to mind: Mario. Adding Mario and friends to Nintendo's 2-player racing game was a good idea for multiple reasons. For one, the Super Mario series was easily Nintendo's most popular franchise. Super Mario World was the best-selling game on the Super Famicom at the time. Including Mario in this new racing game was a guaranteed way to boost sales. It wouldn't be Mario's first racing game either. Nintendo threw the plumber in earlier titles, such as the Famicom Grand Prix series, mostly for marketing purposes. But more importantly, from a design standpoint, adding Mario and his friends to this new 2-player racing game provided variety and recognizability. So as an experiment, the team added Mario, Luigi, and Bowser as playable characters. It was a game changer.
You would be able to tell immediately whether it was Mario or Luigi by the color red and green. They looked good visually, and we were able to clearly differentiate their characteristics, so we thought it was a good choice. Hideki Kono.
Kono made the decision. This was now a Mario game, Super Mario Kart. The 2 directors split up responsibilities for the project. As a veteran of the Super Mario series, Kono oversaw the game's overall presentation. Tadashi Sugiyama was responsible for course design, backgrounds, and characters. With the Mario theme in place, Shigeru Miyamoto's vision for the game evolved. Super Mario Kart wasn't just a 2-player racing game anymore. It was about the thrill of competition, the fun of driving in go-karts, and the joy of playing video games with friends. But before they could figure out the gameplay, the team had to fill out the roster of playable characters. Mario and Luigi were obvious choices. Princess Peach and her loyal servant, Toad, also made the cut. They also added the newest character of the Super Mario series, Yoshi. The cute dinosaur made his debut in Super Mario World, and quickly became one of Nintendo's most likable characters. He particularly appealed to women and children. Rounding out the roster were villains, including the Big Koopa himself, Bowser. It was the first time players could control Bowser in a Mario game. The team also added Donkey Kong Jr., a somewhat surprising addition. According to Miyamoto, it was to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Donkey Kong Jr. arcade game. Sugiyama also noted that Donkey Kong Jr. was more recognizable from behind than his father, Donkey Kong, because he wore a shirt. The development team now had 7 characters, but needed one more to complete the roster. So they threw in the most common enemy of the Super Mario series, a Koopa Troopa. After a few experiments with character design, the roster was complete. But the Super Mario Kart team didn't stop there. To help differentiate the racers further, they applied attributes such as acceleration, top speed, weight, and handling ability. Mario and Luigi were balanced racers, with mostly even stats. Peach and Yoshi had excellent acceleration, but poor handling. Toad and Koopa Troopa could easily turn corners, but weren't very fast, and their light weight made them easy to knock around. Bowser and Donkey Kong Jr. were the fastest and heaviest characters, but their acceleration was slow. With the racers in place, the Super Mario Kart team had to design racetracks. They got plenty of inspiration from Super Mario World. The team created many courses based on Dinosaur Land. World 2 of Super Mario World, Donut Plains, got a corresponding racetrack. The grassy landscape contained a dirt track and narrow bridges to traverse. The ghost houses scattered throughout Dinosaur Land, known for their hidden exits, became Ghost Valley, a track made of wooden planks and filled with hidden shortcuts. World 6 of Super Mario World, Chocolate Island, also got a racetrack, with plenty of dirt and mud to slow players down. And of course, there was Bowser's Castle, full of lava pits and dangerous jumps. Other tracks weren't necessarily based on Super Mario World levels, but fit perfectly into the Mario universe. For example, Koopa Beach had soft sands and shallow water that Kart skimmed across. Vanilla Lake was a track filled with ice, snow, and chilly waters. And finally, there was the ultimate challenge, Rainbow Road, a bright, colorful racetrack with no guardrails to keep racers on the course. At first, these courses were simple raceways, with twists and turns. But the designers added enemies, characters, and objects from the Mario universe. Monty Moles popped out of the ground in Donut Plains. Ice blocks on Vanilla Lake made navigating the course even more difficult. Thwomps in Bowser's Castle could block a player's path or smash a cart. The designers also changed how carts drove on different terrain types. An asphalt track was a relatively smooth ride. Ice courses made driving a little more slippery. Stone blocks made the carts bounce up and down slightly. To help streamline the creative process, the Super Mario Kart team created a track editing software suite that allowed them to manipulate the courses directly on the game cartridge. Designers could place objects like speed zippers and jump bars on the racetrack, add walls or obstacles, and even configure the driving path for computer-controlled players. It was a huge time saver. The new obstacles and terrains made the racing even more dynamic, and getting the kart controls right was more important than ever. Head programmer Masato Kimura spent most of his time tinkering with kart physics. He struggled to find a balance. The more realistic the controls got, the less it felt like a video game. Miyamoto got involved too, to the detriment of Kimura. Miyamoto constantly changed his opinion on how he thought the karts should control, which worried and annoyed Kimura. But luckily, Kimura remembered one of the game's core ideas: to capture the fun of driving go-karts. He said, "I had to go back and tinker with the controls over and over until I approximated something that felt right." The team also added new elements to the driving experience. Racers could jump, something not typically found in a racing game. But Miyamoto insisted on it, claiming it was a feature that couldn't be missing from a Mario game. But one new technique would become a core element in the Mario Kart series: drifting. Drifting was a driving technique made popular in Japan. It was thrilling, but somewhat tricky to perform. Cars drift by countersteering in the opposite direction of the turn. Initially, the Mario Kart team tried this idea, but most playtesters couldn't complete the move. The team wanted to ensure that any player could pull off the maneuver. So they simplified the concept. All players had to do was hold the L or R button and steer in the direction of the turn. Although Hideki Kono knew the compromise wasn't perfect, he thought the technique was really cool and fun to perform. He wanted to reward players who could pull it off, so the team made the karts go faster around turns during a drift. Driving the karts was a blast and easy to learn, but it rewarded players who could perform the more advanced techniques. There was also no speedometer in the game. The development team felt it would clutter the view. The sound of the go-kart's engine would signify how fast a player was going. And naturally, everyone would want to drive a go-kart as fast as possible. Still, at that point, Super Mario Kart was just a racing game set in the Mario universe. That is, until the team added a feature that would define the series: items. Super Mario Kart was not the first racing game to use items. For example, RC Pro-Am on the Nintendo Entertainment System had various weapons and power-ups scattered along the tracks. Missiles could take out other racers. Turbos gave the player a speed boost, and the tire power-up increased the player's turning ability. But Super Mario Kart took items in racing to another level. The idea was there right from the beginning. Before the development team added Mario to the game, co-director Hideki Kono felt the racing was lacking. It wasn't exhilarating just driving around a track at slow speeds. So, as an experiment, the designers added oil cans that players could throw onto the asphalt and create oil spills, which caused the karts to spin out. It added a new thrill to the race. But with the game now set in the Mario universe, potential items were endless. The development team experimented with a few ideas that didn't make the cut, including a placeable piranha plant. In the end, they settled on 8 items that players could use in the Grand Prix races. Green shells, fired straight ahead or could be placed behind the player as an obstacle. Red shells acted like a homing missile, targeting the nearest racer ahead of the player. Banana peels, which replaced the earlier oil cans, spun out racers. Mushrooms gave players a speed boost. A feather, based on the item from Super Mario World, gave racers a super jump, which allowed them to take shortcuts on certain tracks. The star power-up increased the player's speed and made them temporarily invincible, allowing them to spin out other racers and blow through obstacles on the track. There were also coins, an idea from Miyamoto. After all, what was a Mario game without coins? Coins served multiple purposes and added a layer of depth to the race. Collecting coins increased the max speed of the kart, but they also served as a currency. If the player got hit with an item or spun out by another racer, they lost coins. And if a player fell off the track, Lakitu took a few coins away. And finally, there was the lightning bolt, arguably the most powerful item in the game. It shrunk all the other racers on the track, slowing them down and making them vulnerable to being run over. Playtesters loved how the lightning bolt created sudden upsets. The Super Mario Kart team tested items incessantly to refine the balance. And thanks to the track editing software, designers could place item question blocks on courses to quickly test them. However, they ran into a problem. The playtesters found that items sometimes led to chaotic and unfair racing. For example, players in first could get powerful items like lightning bolts or stars, giving them an extraordinary advantage. But co-director Tadashi Sugiyama had a simple solution. The chances of getting certain items depended on the player's position, lap, and race course. If a player was in last, they had a much better chance of getting powerful items, but if they were in first, they would likely get less useful items. It worked perfectly. Thanks to the item balancing, there was no guarantee a skilled player could come out on top. It allowed for even more thrilling upsets and tighter races. DSP chip programmer Hajime Yajima implemented the change, but he couldn't get it working perfectly. The Super Famicom wasn't powerful enough to calculate item odds for both human and computer-controlled players. To compromise, the design team scrapped the idea of computer-controlled players acquiring items. Instead, they got unique weapons based on their personality. Mario and Luigi essentially got a star power-up, making them invincible temporarily and dangerous to racers who got too close. Toad and Princess Peach threw poisonous mushrooms, which shrunk racers. Yoshi, Bowser, Koopa Troopa, and Donkey Kong Jr. launched projectiles that could spin out racers, including an egg, a fireball, a green shell, and a banana. While items added a new dimension to the racing, some development team members worried that hardcore racing fans would scoff at the idea. It introduced too much randomness to the races. So as a compromise, the designers added an option to disable items. But Miyamoto thought the option would remove tension from the experience. He said, "I think that indeterminacy, knowing that something might happen, is the most fun." Co-director Tadashi Sugiyama agreed.
Mario Kart is not Mario Kart without the items. The opportunities that come from using the items means that both skilled and unskilled players can play the game together. A key characteristic of Mario Kart is how it's often the case that you can't win just with your driving skills alone, with the races being very close as everyone does everything they can to get over the finish line first. Tadashi Sugiyama.
In the end, the team removed the no item option from the game. With items in the game, the racing portion of Super Mario Kart was ready to go. The game featured a Grand Prix mode, where players competed against computer-controlled opponents and each other to win a trophy. There was also a match race featuring one-on-one racing. And finally, there was a time trial mode, a must-have feature for a racing game. But as Miyamoto envisioned, Super Mario Kart really was more than just a racing game. And there was one more gameplay mode that would set the game apart from other racing titles: a battle mode. As development began, the Super Mario Kart team knew they wanted a game mode that had nothing to do with racing, so they tried several experiments. But ultimately, the one that stood out was a game where players hurled a ball at each other. They collected points if they scored a hit, but the game needed some work. There were very few walls or obstacles on the course. This allowed players to drive around freely, and it made the playtesters dizzy. Not only that, but the Super Mario Kart team was running out of memory on the cartridge. As they added more and more features to the racing modes, they had less and less space to work with. So the team shelved the battle mode. But as the racing modes neared completion, the team decided to revisit the idea. To fix the dizziness problem, they added more walls and obstacles to the courses. They also replaced the generic ball attack with items. The designers also added a new item exclusive to the battle mode and match races: the Ghost power-up, which turned a player invisible and stole the opposing player's item. To keep track of hits, each player had 3 balloons. If they got hit, they lost a balloon. For Miyamoto, the battle mode was another defining feature of the game.
The very fact that battle mode had nothing to do with racing is what made us want to add it and give it special attention. It helped strengthen the image of the game. It is not, you become a world-class racer, but rather, you get to race around and play in this go-kart with your friends. Shigeru Miyamoto.
With racing, time trials, and now a battle mode, Super Mario Kart was almost ready for prime time. But it wouldn't be complete without music. For that, co-director Hideki Kono brought on a composer he had worked with in the past, Soyo Oka. Oka seemed destined for the job. She had been at Nintendo since 1987 and had composed music for earlier Famicom racing titles, including Famicom Grand Prix 2, 3D Hot Rally, and Versus Excitebike. She had also previously worked with Hideki Kono on ice hockey. Her music had a distinct sound. Oka's work was known internally at Nintendo as Soyoism. Oka enjoyed the challenge of composing music under the restrictions of the Famicom, where music still had to sound good if a track disappeared due to hardware limitations. She called it a sound puzzle. But with the Super Famicom, those restrictions were gone. It allowed her more freedom in her compositions. She called the new system Beyond Wonderful. Oka's first works on the Super Famicom were Pilot Wings and SimCity. Both game soundtracks had a mellow, relaxed sound. With Super Mario Kart, Oka had to come up with more upbeat music that fit in a racing game, but also had a Mario flavor. Hideki Kono, who was in charge of the game's overall presentation, gave her the freedom to unleash her Soyoism on the soundtrack. While a few music tracks were based on previous Mario compositions, most of Oka's work was brand new, and the new compositions sounded like they had been in the Mario universe the whole time. There was the upbeat, hard-driving theme of the Mario circuit. The relaxing, coastal vibes of Koopa Beach. And Oka's personal favorite, the epic, synth-heavy music of Rainbow Road. What began as a failed experiment to make a two-player F-Zero game was now a unique, fun, go-karting adventure. Super Mario Kart expanded the idea of what a racing game could be. Power-up items allowed for thrilling, upset victories. Distinct racetracks made navigating the courses an integral part of the gameplay. And the new battle mode made games with friends even more intense. For co-director Hideki Kono, the thrill of competition made Super Mario Kart a memorable game.
I really played the game a lot during the adjustment and debug phases of the development. Because of the strong competitive gameplay, once I started test playing, I would get excited and start shouting out while I played. I just couldn't help it, because of the randomness and potential for making huge comebacks. I may have been a bit distracting for other development teams working on other projects. Hideki Kono.
By the summer of 1992, Nintendo was ready to reveal Super Mario Kart to the world. But surprisingly, despite being a Mario game, Super Mario Kart did not generate much hype leading up to its release. Early previews in video game magazines were short, lost in a sea of other games. Many of the write-ups compared the game heavily to F-Zero. Nintendo tagged Super Mario Kart for an August 27, 1992 release in Japan. Leading up to the launch date, co-director Tadashi Sugiyama remembered feeling unsure about the game's success. He said, "I knew it was fun, but I didn't imagine users would actually like it that much." Sugiyama was in for a huge surprise. Thursday, August 27, 1992 was a big day for Nintendo. Super Mario Kart was on store shelves, and Nintendo was hosting their annual Famicom Space World exhibit at the 4th Shoshinkai Trade Show in Tokyo. The event allowed Nintendo and third-party developers to show off their latest titles for the Famicom, Super Famicom, and Game Boy systems. Out of the 240 games exhibited, Super Mario Kart was one of the few playable titles at the show. People waited up to 1 hour in line to play the game for only 5 minutes. Word about Nintendo's funky new racing game spread quickly. Children and adults rushed to stores to pick up a copy. Some, including HAL Laboratories' head of software development Satoru Iwata, snuck out of work to buy the game. In just 2 days, Super Mario Kart was sold out across Japan. According to Electronic Gaming Monthly, many stores wouldn't even accept deposits to hold the game, and it only got more popular. Reviews poured in from the Japanese video game press.
Games that simulate reality can never actually be reality, and while catching up to reality is very difficult, fiction can draw near to it or even surpass it in some ways. While Super Mario Kart is absolutely a work of fiction, it's more faithful to reality than any simulation. It simulates the excitement of a race and the joy of driving. Namco Shida, Famitsu.
Famitsu magazine gave Super Mario Kart a 32 out of 40, calling it exhilarating, challenging, and much more polished than F-Zero. Family Computer magazine scored the game 24.5 out of 30, noting that the multiplayer modes were very appealing. However, the game wasn't perfect. One reviewer felt that doing well in the game depended on getting lucky with items. And a 16-year-old from Tokyo wrote to Famitsu claiming people were barfing while playing the battle mode. But that didn't stop Super Mario Kart from flying off store shelves. It entrenched itself in the Famitsu Top 30 list for more than a year. The Yomiuri Shimbun, one of Japan's largest newspapers, nominated Super Mario Kart as one of their top games of 1992. Competitions were held throughout Japan, where people competed for the fastest times around tracks. There were even rumors Nintendo was working on an updated special edition cartridge for a 1993 release. Super Mario Kart made its way into other mediums as well. The Super Mario Club Show, a weekly video game program on Japanese television, regularly featured Super Mario Kart competitions. There was also a rush of merchandise. The combination of Mario and go-karts lent itself well to toys. There were plushies, battery-powered RC cars, small go-kart figures, model kits, children's toys, and more. Super Mario Kart would become the best-selling Super Famicom game of all time, selling 3.82 million units in Japan. But would it be popular elsewhere in the world? 1992 was an important year for Nintendo of America. It was the 16-bit Super Nintendo's first full year in stores. And Nintendo faced stiff competition from Sega and their 16-bit console, the Genesis. The Genesis had been out since 1989 and made quite a dent in Nintendo's market share. The Genesis was also cheaper than the Super Nintendo and had more games. In addition, Sega had recently launched their flagship mascot to compete with Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog. Nintendo had to change things up to stay competitive. They lowered the price of the Super Nintendo from $200 to $150. They also released a standalone console without a bundled game and only one controller for $100. As a response, Sega lowered the price of their Sonic Bundle Genesis to $130 and started offering a standalone console for $100. Sega was also showing off their newest hardware creation, the Sega CD, due in the fall of 1992. The peripheral beefed up the hardware power of the Genesis, and the CD medium provided more storage space, better sound, and full-motion video games. Nintendo also had plans for a CD-ROM attachment, but it never came to fruition. Nintendo's best hope for success was with its software.
The name of the game in this business is games. When the consumer pulls out his wallet, he wants top value for his entertainment dollar, and that's what we've always delivered. But this new lineup represents the best group of games we've ever introduced. Peter Main, Nintendo of America.
Nintendo showed off their new game lineup at the 1992 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. During the show, Nintendo announced more than 175 new games for the second half of 1992. 75 of them were for the Super Nintendo. It was the largest rollout of new software in Nintendo's history. There was Mario Paint, an educational art program that came with a mouse. Street Fighter II, a port of the popular arcade fighting game. And finally, Super Mario Kart. CES attendees got to try all the latest titles, and Super Mario Kart was the surprise star of the show. Luckily, gamers wouldn't have to wait very long to own a copy for themselves. With little text in the game, the localization process was relatively quick. However, there were minor changes between the Japanese and international versions of the game. Most notably, the animations during the trophy presentation screens. In Japan, Bowser and Peach drank champagne when they won a Grand Prix race. But for the international releases, they simply celebrate with the bottles. Nintendo of America was adamant about maintaining a squeaky clean image with parents. On September 1st, 1992, just 4 days after its Japanese launch, Nintendo released Super Mario Kart in North America. And just like in Japan, the response was incredible. GamePro magazine gave the game a near-perfect score, praising the multiplayer modes and accessibility for people of all skills. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the game its Editor's Choice Award and called Super Mario Kart the best driving game to come along for some time. Nintendo backed up Super Mario Kart with a fourth-quarter $30 million advertising campaign.
And make a mean test. Or go into battle mode and ruin his day. 2 speeds. Fast and way too fast. It's 2-player fun on the split screen. Only for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
Super Mario Kart graced the cover of the October 1992 issue of Nintendo Power, which contained tips and tricks, maps, and strategies for various courses. Nintendo also teamed up with Domino's Pizza, which had a Super Mario Kart scratch-and-win game with $25 million in prizes. In December of 1992, Super Mario Kart crossed the Atlantic and hit store shelves in the UK. British video game magazine Control scored the game an 86 out of 100, calling it the best racing game on the Super Nintendo. The following year, Super Mario Kart reached the rest of Europe. German magazine Video Games had high praise, calling Super Mario Kart the best racing game of all time. Not bad for a small side project at Nintendo. Super Mario Kart was a surprise hit. Nintendo sold more than 1 million copies globally in less than a year. It was so popular that Nintendo bundled the game with the Super Nintendo in several regions, further increasing sales. By the end of the console's lifetime, Super Mario Kart had sold more than 8.5 million units worldwide, making it the fourth best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time. But while Super Mario Kart sold incredibly well, it impacted the living room even more. Whether it be the natural competitiveness of racing or the friendly aesthetics of the Mario universe, Super Mario Kart brought people together like no other game before it.
So innocently, Super Mario Kart crept into the house. It looked at first about as interesting as Tribe, but I soon discovered that this game crossed barriers, both in gameplay and generations. And what's even sweeter, the kids didn't always win. My teenage years as a hoon on wheels were finally beginning to pay off. I knew how to drive like a fool. They didn't. Mark Cam, the Sydney Morning Herald.
Friends teamed up to unlock all the races in Grand Prix mode. Siblings duked it out in battle mode or raced each other one-on-one. Parents competed with their kids for the fastest time around the courses. So it was no surprise that Super Mario Kart won a Parents' Choice Award in 1992, given to, quote, entertaining products that introduce skills, reinforce them, and glamorize courage and common sense. Other game developers took notice of the popularity of Super Mario Kart, and soon a flood of clones hit the market on both PC and consoles, hoping to cash in on the kart racing craze. Sega put out Sonic Drift on their handheld Game Gear system. Atari released Atari Karts for the ill-fated Jaguar console. There were also clones on the Super Nintendo, such as Street Racer, a part racing, part fighting game. But nothing came close to the success of Super Mario Kart. The game stayed on the Nintendo Power Charts for an astonishing 68 months, until the magazine stopped tracking Super Nintendo games. It was the beginning of a popular new franchise for Nintendo. Their next console, the Nintendo 64, would feature the first follow-up to the original game, Mario Kart 64. And soon, Mario Kart games would come out for every new Nintendo console and handheld. And today, its popularity is bigger than ever. The best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Many of the staff members who were involved with the original game still work at Nintendo. Shigeru Miyamoto is still Nintendo's chief software producer. He is widely considered the greatest video game designer of all time. Hideki Kono remained involved in every future Mario Kart game. Today, he is in charge of Nintendo's mobile game division. Tadashi Sugiyama would go on to work on several Mario Kart games, including Mario Kart 64 and Mario Kart Double Dash for the GameCube. Sugiyama also directed F-Zero X, released in 1998. And thanks to the power of the Nintendo 64, he was finally able to implement multiplayer in the fast-paced racing game. Today, Sugiyama is still with Nintendo, working as a designer. Programmer Masato Kimura, who worked tirelessly to perfect the kart controls, continued to program various Nintendo games, including The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker and Super Mario Galaxy. Most recently, he worked on the latest Mario Kart game, Mario Kart 8. Hajime Yajima, who implemented the DSP chip into Super Mario Kart, continued to put his technical knowledge to use. He provided assistance with new, graphically intense games, like Star Fox and Super Mario 64. Today, he is still working within the technology department at Nintendo. But not everyone stayed. Composer Soyo Oka left the company in 1995 to become a freelancer, working in radio, television, and video games. But Super Mario Kart stayed with her. Even today, people come up to Oka and talk about the game. She said, "I am truly moved to think that I have inspired children and young people more than I had ever imagined. At these times, I again come to understand how much of an amazing hit the game was and how many people played it." In total, the Mario Kart franchise has sold more than 150 million copies worldwide, making it one of Nintendo's best-selling series. And it all started with Super Mario Kart. A game that began as a failed experiment became one of the most influential games of all time. In 2019, the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York, acknowledged the game's impact by inducting it into the World Video Game Hall of Fame.
Super Mario Kart's unique combination of familiar characters and exhilarating social gameplay produced a powerful franchise that invited friends, family, and gaming fans of all ages to the Mushroom Kingdom for an unforgettable ride. The Strong Museum.